They called her the most dangerous woman in history. But it wasn't her armies that terrified Rome, it wasn't her wealth, it wasn't even her intelligence. It was something far more insidious, far more devastating, far more impossible to defend against. Cleopatra possessed a weapon that could turn Rome's greatest generals into puppets, transform iron-willed conquerors into lovesick fools, and extract state secrets from the most disciplined minds in the ancient world. The Romans called it witchcraft, but it wasn't magic. It was science. A calculated, perfected system of psychological and physical manipulation so sophisticated that it functioned like a manual for dismantling human willpower. This is the story of the forbidden art, Cleopatra's secret sex manual, and the weapon she used to almost steal the Roman Empire from within. Let's destroy a myth right now. Cleopatra was not physically beautiful by Roman standards. Ancient sources are brutally clear about this. Plutarch, writing from Roman accounts, says her beauty was not incomparable. Cassius Dio suggests she was average-looking at best. Coins bearing her image show a woman with a prominent nose, strong features, nothing that would explain the legendary effect she had on men. So if it wasn't conventional beauty, what was it? What did Cleopatra possess that allowed her to completely dominate Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, and then do it again with Mark Antony, turning him from Rome's greatest general into a man who would abandon his own troops to follow her? The answer is strategic seduction, not instinctive, not natural, learned, perfected, weaponized. And here's what historians don't want to admit. The evidence suggests she had training, specific, documented training in the art of political seduction that went far beyond anything Rome had ever encountered. Alexandria, under the Ptolemies, was not just an intellectual capital. It was a repository of knowledge from across the known world. Greek texts on rhetoric and persuasion, Persian manuscripts on the arts of pleasure, Indian treatises on sexuality that wouldn't reach Europe for over 1,000 years, and Cleopatra had access to all of it. She was fluent in 9 languages, she'd been trained in philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and chemistry. You think she ignored the library's collections on human psychology and physical intimacy? You think she didn't study those texts with the same intensity she studied statecraft and military strategy? The meeting with Julius Caesar in 48 BC is where we see the forbidden art in action for the first time. Caesar arrives in Alexandria expecting to mediate a civil war between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII. He's 52 years old, battle-hardened, politically brilliant. He's seen every manipulation, every seduction attempt, every political game. He's immune to the obvious. So Cleopatra doesn't use the obvious. Ancient sources say she had herself delivered to Caesar rolled up in a carpet, but that's the sanitized version. What actually happened was far more calculated. She bypassed his guards, his advisors, every layer of protection, and presented herself directly to him in a private chamber, alone, vulnerable, speaking to him in Latin, which no Egyptian royal had bothered to learn in generations, demonstrating immediately that she understood Rome, understood him, had studied him. And then she talked. Ancient sources emphasize this. It wasn't her body that conquered Caesar, it was her conversation, her voice, her ability to speak about Roman history, Roman philosophy, Roman military strategy at a level that Caesar himself found intellectually stimulating. She made him feel understood. She made him feel like he'd finally found someone who operated at his level. And while his mind was engaged, while his ego was being stroked, she was deploying other techniques. Her perfume, custom blended using Egyptian knowledge of aromatics and their psychological effects. Scents that contained compounds we'd now recognize as pheromones or mild aphrodisiacs. Her body language, carefully calibrated to suggest availability without desperation. Her timing, knowing exactly when to withdraw attention, when to create distance, when to make him work for her approval. This is not instinct. This is training. This is the forbidden art. Within weeks, Caesar had sided with Cleopatra against her brother. Within months, she was pregnant with his child. Within a year, he'd installed her as the sole ruler of Egypt and brought her to Rome as his mistress, parading him through the city in open defiance of Roman law and custom. The most disciplined, calculating man in Rome had become reckless. Why? Because Cleopatra understood something fundamental about male psychology, especially powerful male psychology. These men are surrounded by people who fear them, flatter them, or want something from them. She gave Caesar something he'd never experienced, intellectual partnership combined with complete sexual surrender. She made him feel like a god, not through worship, through understanding, through meeting him as an equal intellectually while submitting physically in ways that made him feel powerful. It's the perfect psychological trap. His ego gets fed on both levels simultaneously. But here's where it gets truly dark. This wasn't just seduction. It was intelligence extraction. Ancient sources mention how Cleopatra would engage Caesar in conversations about Roman politics, Roman military movements, the loyalties of specific senators, casual questions, pillow talk, and Caesar, feeling safe, feeling understood, would answer, would reveal information he'd never share in an official setting. She was running an intelligence operation disguised as a love affair. Every intimate moment was a debriefing. Every night together was another data point in her understanding of Rome's weaknesses.
The hypothetical secret sex manual, if it existed, would have contained this systematic knowledge. Not just physical techniques, though those would be included. The real power would be in the psychological warfare sections. How to identify a man's core insecurity and exploit it. How to create emotional dependency through intermittent reinforcement, giving and withdrawing attention in patterns that create obsession. How to use conversation and intellectual engagement as foreplay more potent than any physical act. How to extract information without seeming to interrogate. How to make a man believe that serving your interests is actually serving his own. The manual would also contain pharmacological knowledge that ancient Alexandria possessed and Rome did not. Aphrodisiacs, not the mythical nonsense we think of today, but actual compounds that affect blood flow, hormone production, neurological response. The Egyptians had access to plants and minerals from Africa, India, and the Far East. They understood chemistry at a level that wouldn't be matched in Europe for over 1,000 years. Mandrake root for its psychoactive properties, opium in controlled doses to create euphoria and dependency, compounds from certain fish and plants that increase circulation and sensitivity. Mixed properly, administered subtly through food or drink, or absorbed through skin contact via oils and perfumes, these substances would make every encounter more intense, more memorable, more addictive than anything the man had experienced before. And here's the genius. Cleopatra would have understood tolerance and withdrawal. The manual wouldn't just explain how to create pleasure, it would explain how to create dependency. How to ensure that when the man is away from you, nothing else satisfies. How to rewire his neurological reward system so that you become the only source of dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins at those levels. You're not just a lover, you're a drug. And like any drug, withdrawal is painful. The man starts to make irrational decisions just to get back to you, starts to prioritize time with you over military campaigns, political alliances, even his own safety. We see this pattern repeat exactly with Mark Antony. Different man, different circumstances, same results. Antony meets Cleopatra in 41 BC. He's 42, fresh from dividing the Roman world with Octavian. He's supposed to squeeze tribute from Egypt and move on. Instead, he stays for months, then years. He marries Cleopatra in an Egyptian ceremony that Rome doesn't recognize. He starts dressing like an Egyptian, speaking Greek, celebrating Egyptian festivals. He gives away Roman territories to her and their children. He declares war on his own adopted city to defend her. This is not love. This is addiction. This is a man whose neurological reward system has been completely hijacked, and Cleopatra did it deliberately. She studied Caesar. She learned from that experience. She refined her techniques.
By the time she deployed the forbidden art against Mark Antony, she'd had over a decade to perfect the system. She knew exactly what psychological buttons to push, exactly which compounds to use, exactly how to create a dependency so complete that Antony would rather die than be separated from her. The forbidden art would have also contained timing techniques, when to give completely, when to withhold, how to use pregnancy strategically, not just for producing heirs, but for creating emotional bonds that transcend politics. Cleopatra had children with both Caesar and Antony, but notice the timing. She revealed Caesar's pregnancy after he'd already committed to her politically. She had children with Antony spaced strategically throughout their relationship, each birth renewing his emotional investment, each child another chain binding him to her cause. There would be sections on performance, not in the crude sense, but in the theatrical sense. How to control every element of an encounter: lighting, music, scent, temperature, location, creating multi-sensory experiences that overwhelm the brain's ability to analyze and judge. Ancient sources describe Cleopatra's banquets as legendary, but they weren't just about food. They were orchestrated psychological experiences, every course designed to build anticipation, every entertainment calculated to lower inhibitions, every moment choreographed to make the target feel like they've entered a world of pure pleasure where normal rules don't apply. And perhaps most importantly, the manual would contain exit strategies, how to end the relationship on your terms, how to ensure loyalty even after physical intimacy has ceased, how to weaponize jealousy if necessary. Cleopatra demonstrated this mastery at Actium. When she retreated from the battle, she knew Antony would follow. She'd created such complete dependency that he would abandon his own fleet, his own men, his own strategic position just to chase after her. That's not accidental. That's the result of years of psychological conditioning. She'd programmed him, and when she activated that programming, it overrode every other consideration, including his survival instinct. Now here's where we need to address the Roman reaction. Why did Octavian fear Cleopatra so intensely? Why did Roman propaganda portray her as a witch, a monster, a threat to the entire republic? Because they understood, at some level, what she represented. Cleopatra had discovered an exploit in human psychology, specifically in powerful male psychology, that made traditional defenses irrelevant. You can't guard against her with soldiers. You can't outmaneuver her with politics. You can't defeat her with military force, because her battlefield is intimacy. Her weapon is desire. And once she's in position, once she has access to her target, no amount of discipline or training can protect against the systematic dismantling of willpower that the forbidden art represents.
Octavian was terrified because he saw what happened to Caesar. He saw what happened to Antony. Two of the greatest men Rome ever produced, reduced to tools in Cleopatra's hands. And he knew that if she survived, if she had access to him or to any future Roman leader, she could do it again. The forbidden art wasn't just dangerous to individuals, it was dangerous to the entire system of Roman power. Because if you can control the men who control the legions, you control Rome, without ever raising an army, without ever fighting a battle, through sheer mastery of human weakness. This is why, after Cleopatra's death, there was such systematic destruction of everything associated with her. Octavian didn't just kill her, he had her images defaced, her name scratched from monuments, her children hunted down, her advisors executed, every document from her reign scrutinized. Anything that might contain the forbidden art, any text that might preserve her methods, was destroyed. This wasn't normal historical revisionism. This was a deliberate campaign to erase not just a person, but a body of knowledge. Because if that knowledge survived, if some ambitious woman or man got access to it and mastered it, they could use it against Rome just as Cleopatra had. Some scholars believe fragments of the manual survived in other forms. The famous Greek courtesan manuals from late antiquity, certain Persian and Arabic texts on the arts of love that appear centuries later, Indian tantric traditions that emphasize using sexuality as a path to power. These might all contain pieces of what Cleopatra knew, filtered through different cultures, stripped of their explicitly political applications, but preserving some of the core techniques. But the complete system, the forbidden art as Cleopatra practiced it, that knowledge died with her, or was destroyed in the fire that consumed so much of the library of Alexandria, or was deliberately hidden, sealed away, deemed too dangerous to preserve. Think about what this means. The greatest threat to Roman civilization wasn't Hannibal crossing the Alps. It wasn't the Germanic tribes. It wasn't civil war or economic collapse. It was one woman who understood human psychology and human sexuality at a level that made her nearly invincible in intimate settings. She weaponized vulnerability. She turned pleasure into chains. She made powerful men destroy themselves while believing they were following their hearts. And here's the most disturbing thought. If Cleopatra, operating 2,000 years ago with the knowledge available in ancient Alexandria, could develop a system this effective, what's possible now? With modern psychology, with neurochemistry, with pharmaceutical science, with data mining and behavioral modeling. If someone today wanted to recreate the forbidden art using 21st century knowledge, they could build something far more powerful than anything Cleopatra possessed.
They could create a system of manipulation so sophisticated that the target wouldn't even realize they were being controlled until long after they'd given away everything. The Romans destroyed the manual because they understood that some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve. Some weapons are too powerful to allow to exist. The forbidden art wasn't evil in a moral sense. It was evil in a strategic sense. It was a weapon without defense, a vulnerability that couldn't be patched, an exploit in human nature that couldn't be fixed. And Octavian, brilliant strategist that he was, recognized that the only solution was total information warfare. Destroy every trace. Kill everyone who knew. Rewrite the story so that future generations would think Cleopatra's power came from beauty or luck or magic, anything except the truth, that it came from systematic study and calculated application of human psychology. So, was the manual real? Did a physical document exist containing all of this knowledge? We'll probably never know. But we know the knowledge existed because we can see the results. We can see Caesar and Antony making decisions that destroyed their political positions and ultimately their lives, all in service to a woman who demonstrably needed them more than they needed her. We can see the pattern, the systematic nature of Cleopatra's approach, the consistency of her results. This wasn't improvisation. This was execution of a plan. This was someone following a playbook. The greatest weapon in history wasn't the atomic bomb. It wasn't the machine gun. It wasn't the tank or the aircraft carrier. It was the knowledge of how to rewire human decision-making through intimacy. How to make someone destroy themselves while believing they're achieving their desires. How to turn the strongest force in human nature, the drive for sexual and emotional connection, into a leash that leads a man wherever you want him to go. Cleopatra mastered this weapon. Rome killed her for it, and then Rome made absolutely certain that no one would ever master it again. The forbidden art is lost. The manual is gone. The secrets died with the serpent of the Nile. But the vulnerability it exploited? That's still there. That's still in every powerful person who thinks they're too smart, too disciplined, too aware to fall victim to manipulation through intimacy. They're wrong. Cleopatra proved they're wrong. She proved it twice. And if her knowledge had survived, if the forbidden art was still available, someone could prove it again tomorrow. That's why it had to be destroyed. Not because it was immoral, but because it worked. And some weapons are too effective to be allowed to exist.